It's now Escalation of Freedom +1. 1 day since Helldivers 2 released its biggest ever update, and initial player feedback is that they aren't happy with it. The general thought is that Arrowhead has now made everything in the game harder to deal with, bigger enemies, more armor, and greater numbers, while also nerfing a player's ability to efficiently deal with these new threats. There's also been claims of lying by the studio, dated approaches to game balancing, and inconsistencies within the studio's messaging. It begs the question, what direction is the studio planning to take with Helldivers, and why? Yeah, let's check it all out. Welcome to the channel. This is LtBuzzLitebeer, and since yesterday, when I posted my initial thoughts on Escalation of Freedom, the community has become even more heated. The CEO, Shams Georgiani, has now taken to Discord and Twitter, and in general, it could have gone better. In case you haven't done so already, take just a moment to hit subscribe for more Helldivers content. It's free, and it really helps the channel get noticed in the far corners of YouTube. And while you're at it, ring that notifications bell to receive my latest upload alerts. And it's time to check it all out. What the hell happened with Escalation of Freedom? Yeah, let's get stuck into the latest update for Helldivers. Here's just a few of the headlines popping up after Escalation of Freedom dropped yesterday. PCGamer went with Helldivers 2's loudest players go nuclear over another unpopular nerf, but Arrowhead CEO keeps calm. Quote, some are going buff everything. Others are saying it's too easy. Most are just playing. GamesRadar led with this title. Helldivers 2's new fire weapon nerfs are down to one shotgun being used in, quote, 30% of all tournament sessions, says Arrowhead CEO. Is that a problem? Yes. Arrowhead is still actively discussing the nerfs. And finally, GamesRadar echoed the first two with this one. As Helldivers 2 players grill Arrowhead over more nerfs, its CEO speaks to the buff everything and its too easy crowds. Quote, we are listening and will tweak. Escalation of Freedom stokes familiar anti-nerf complaints. Links to all three of these articles can be found in the video description, and I've quoted and tagged in gaming site opinions in the past. They tend to recycle the same basic themes over and over, and for many, they also tend to weigh in without the full context or any sort of situational awareness. Now, for the record, Escalation of Freedom was not a total failure. It isn't like that 1 gig of updates brought nothing of value to Helldivers. For instance, in one of those finally it has happened moments 6 months after launch and in a co-op horde style shooter, the damn friends list nightmares seems to have finally been sorted out. One would hope that in an online squad up environment, having a friends list mechanic in good working order would have been launched day one with the game's release, but for divers, that hasn't been the case. Speaking as a player that has nearly hit 400 hours invested into Helldivers, there are some great quality of life improvements here, such as stimming at full health to replenish stamina, stims no longer break other squad mates' sprints when used, and hell bombs detonating if destroyed after being activated. And I could go on for another few minutes. Add on that aforementioned now functioning social tab, and if Arrowhead had just led with this, all would have been rosy. Some players would naturally want more, but that's human nature. Here's the thing. Arrowhead didn't choose that course. They didn't leave well enough alone, and that lands us where we are now, the present. Back on March 25th, and hot on the heels of a massive Nerf Fest patch, Patrick Lasota, head of product testing at Arrowhead, published at that time a pretty controversial explanation attempting to explain weapon balancing nerfs, the buff first mentality, and more. Quote, many have commented that primary weapons aren't powerful enough and are unable to deal with all the enemies either by the amount of ammo required or their raw DPS. This is very much intentional. You need to rely on your stratagems and the stratagems of your team to deal with all the enemies effectively, either by Eagle airstrikes orbitals, support weapons, or turrets, some of your loadout or team should be tailoring their loadouts to killing the weaker stuff more efficiently. The underlying issue with this statement is the game design itself. Now, if primary weapon firepower and that player power fantasy is supposed to be somewhat subdued and the game is to be played, at least according to this studio statement, in a stratagem-centric manner, then those stratagems have to be available on a moment's notice and they have to make the players feel overwhelmingly powerful. But they don't. As the game throws more and more enemies at players with increasingly stronger armor values, making them tougher and more resilient, players want and need more something. More primary weapon power, more versatility, more stratagem oomph to be able to fight back the enemy onslaught. Up until recently, all effects within the game have been a punishment to players, designed to hamper a player's ability to wage war. One less stratagem, greater scatter on directed shots, call in and cooldown negative effects, environmental effects, taking all stratagems offline, and even enemy facilities designed to restrict access to the one thing Lesota and Arrowhead state they want players to rely on: stratagems. Going back to the GamesRadar headline talking about that one shotgun being used 30% of the time versus the Terminids, and Shams Georgiani, the studio's CEO, was quoted on this one from a Discord post. Quote, "The incendiary breaker was like 30% of all Terminid sessions at some point. Very much a meta gun. Is that a problem? Yes. Is it a big one? I don't know. We'll discuss it." File that statement away for just a moment because it represents how a studio operates based on spreadsheets, based on pick rates and power deltas. And let's now take a look at an opposing viewpoint.
The way that you remove metas is you take the stuff that's falling behind, that's not in meta, and you buff it. You don't take the things that are working, you nerf the shit out of them. It doesn't work that way. The moment you do that, you've created a worse meta. You've created a toxic meta because people are upset, and now they have to look for something that actually works. It's a bad direction in terms of development.
You've created a toxic meta because people are upset and now they have to look for something that actually works. And credit to Pirate Software for that profound and quite logical statement. I recently saw a response to Shams Georgiani over on Twitter characterizing Arrowhead's approach to balancing, and it went something like this. A car comes into a repair shop and one tire is perfectly inflated, but the other three are nearly flat. Arrowhead's approach? Deflate the working tire so it's now just as flat as the others. Johan, Helldivers' chief creative officer and former CEO, just this morning posted a full explanation of the weapon balancing changes, and for now, let's center in on the Breaker Incendiary, which, according to Georgiani's earlier statement, was clearly in the crosshairs for the balancing team. Quote, "After multiple changes to the fire damage, the Incendiary Breaker quickly became one of the most powerful weapons in the game, as it absolutely dominated the Terminid frontline and is a bit too reliable when facing the bugs, overshadowing the other weapons. By increasing the recoil and reducing the maximum number of magazines, we intend to make the Incendiary Breaker more demanding for good ammo economy, while keeping its immense power intact." There are several key words in that statement that need focusing in on. Too reliable, overshadowing, demanding. And I want to include the community's voice in just a moment because it's important to do so. But here it comes again, full circle. The studio wants a stratagem-centric playstyle. The studio creates multiple negative effects to limit stratagem accessibility and power. Players find X weapon to compensate for studio's negative effects. Studio sees players using X weapon too much, and it has its power reduced. The Incendiary Breaker is the latest casualty on Arrowhead's sacrificial balancing altar. The Railgun 1.0, the Eruptor, the Breaker, now on multiple nerf passes, because this is not the first, along with many others too numerous to list. Now, to be fair, the game has also seen a comprehensive list of weapon buffs, by many times outnumbering the nerf counts. But the issue is, and always will be, the nerfs here are heavier and far more directed, while the buffs often yield little to no tangible results. Assault rifles, SMGs, marksman rifles, laser weapons, some sidearms, basically everything outside of a handful of specific weapons could have received a significant push upwards to this now aforementioned breaker, creating a wide open meta where the crossbow and purifier would be just as lethal and fun to use as every other weapon. But Arrowhead again chose a different path, which has torqued some players, asking once again why they're seeing all of these power reductions to their favorite weapons in a non-esports, non-PvP, non-competitive, PvE only horde-style shooter. Georgiani took to Twitter with yesterday's update asking for community feedback, and besides the normal fiery insults, there were constructive comments being offered up. You ruined an exciting update with a nerf that now everyone will talk about instead of enjoying the new content. Why not have just waited? Why not buff other weapons instead? You keep scoring so many own goals, and it's so sad to see as it's such an excellent and amazing game. Helldivers content creator Thick Fillet offered up this one. In terms of the balance changes, how does Johan stepping down to a CCO position and thinking that time to kill being a main issue being reflected in the balance changes? It feels like more spreadsheet balancing, like with the grenade pistol losing 2 max ammo to gain 2 on resupply. Overall, more grenade pistol shots, but why even remove the 2 max? It's a bad precedent, and the same ideology that got people to complain the first go around. Overall, all the content changes are great, but nerfing the 2 most popular weapons without any compensation will leave a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. Most players coming back probably will just enjoy the new content, but it's upsetting to the loyal player base who has stayed this long time. And this final one is seen and echoed quite a bit after yesterday's changes. You just couldn't help it, could you? Nerfing again the most popular weapons instead of buffing the bad ones. What's more, with totally undeserved nerfs, especially for the already dead Slugger. Also, all content is exclusively aimed at the high-level players. Such a disappointment. Understandably, Twitter is not real life, Reddit is not reality, and players did come back to the game, although I would guess not in as great a numbers as the studio was hoping for. Steam shows a 24-hour peak of just shy of 63,000 concurrent players, excluding PlayStation, and it being a Tuesday, players have other obligations, family, work, etc. I would think the studio is believing that's not a bad first jump. But ideally, the mark Helldivers needs to shoot for is to get back into the 6-figure count. 100,000 players or more concurrent on Steam, which is entirely achievable based on a game that has over 12 million players, and it's only about 6-ish months old. Escalation had the potential to do that day 1, minute 1, but with the good, there's the bad, and seeing things like the Breaker, and I haven't mentioned it yet, the Flamethrower nerfed, hot on the heels of this week's upcoming fire-centric Warbond, has players calling sus. There were also massive performance issues with the super Helldive difficulty resulting in players chain crashing, me being one of them, and eventually they just gave up and logged off, hoping to once again return once the game was stable. Underneath the surface of Escalation of Freedom, there's a much bigger and far less discussed issue of inconsistencies within the game branding, inconsistencies within Helldivers itself. On one hand, we get strong outlier weapons that are nerfed, bringing down their power levels, while enemy levels and toughness are simultaneously increased. The studio claims that the game is stratagem-centric, but then pastes players with 3, 4, or even more negative modifiers, greatly restricting their stratagem strength. The game itself is clearly not based in reality. I mean, we can continually respawn after dying, but then the Flamethrower is severely nerfed against heavy enemy armor, all in the name of chasing realism. It's difficult to decide how best to face the game when even the studio doesn't deliver consistent messaging. I think I've made this abundantly clear in my past Helldivers videos, but I enjoy the hell out of playing this game. Squad time with my buds is precious. Squatting up with randoms and barely making it out of a super hot extraction, hearing those screams and excitement on the mics as we make it to space, is a dopamine drip on steroids. But there is clearly a disconnect between what Arrowhead says and what Arrowhead does. We've seen promises of no more nerfs coming to the game, and then yesterday happens. Here, how about this? If I could just say a few things to the game developers, it would be this. Stop making changes based on obsolete, old-school metrics. Game balancing is far more than spreadsheets. It's greater than pick rates. Helldivers is not a game that requires mental gymnastics to understand. You pick some armor, you pick a few weapons, you pick some stratagems, and you do some annihilating. It's both casual and hardcore, it's both silly and serious, and it deserves a different balancing approach. Tear up those old guidebooks on how to precisely balance a game from those antiquated How to Be a Game Developer 101 manuals, and instead focus in on two factors only. Will it make players feel powerful, and is it fun? If whatever you're working on, enemy variants, weapons, stratagems, whatever, if it fails either of those two tests, powerful and fun, then it's wrong for the game and it needs more work. Also, stop listening to those outliers screaming about how the game is too easy. It's not. And if it's too difficult, there's a way to change that to cater to a player's skill level. But there's only so many times you can pull the rug out from under a player's feet. There's only so many times you can nerf their player power fantasies while buffing everything around them, trying to kill them before they just say, fuck it, I'm out. And on that note, here are your top 3 comments from last video. Hell of a transition there, right? And all 3 of these received a ton of upvotes, and all 3 of these follow the same trend: Arrowhead and those balancing nerfs. Now, number 1 comes to us from THEBEAVONATOR. New rule: if the devs nerf a weapon, they have to post a video of them all using that weapon on Helldive difficulty. Number 2 comes to us, and I don't even know how to say this, TM-QE2us. Sorry if I don't know how to say that. Anyway, you got the number 2 comment with, they nerfed the incendiary shotgun right before releasing a new war bond with a different incendiary shotgun. Gee, I wonder why. And number 3 from yesterday is from 8445. Arrowhead trying not to nerf weapons challenge. Impossible. And that was the consistent theme I saw in yesterday's comment section. Those nerfs and how Arrowhead couldn't seem to leave well enough alone. What's next? Do they alter or revert these changes? Is this going to be one consistent pattern of reducing player power and buffing enemies until infinity? Drop me a comment and you could make it into next video's top 3. Remember to hit subscribe and to ring that notifications bell to receive my latest upload alerts. All my socials, including links to all of today's sources, can be found in the video description. We eclipsed the 236,000 subscriber mark, and there are no signs of the channel slowing down. And all of this is due to your incredible and consistent support. Until the next one, this is LtBuzzLitebeer signing off.